done, which is, that's the model that was proposed. The interesting thing is this is what got published as a government spec. And the only reason it got published like this was the topography system that the US government was using at the time could not render this model. So they simplified the model to the most complicated thing a topography system could do. And this is the picture that came out of that.
Right now still uses waterfall, by the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of groups that still do. But what most people are using, like the government approved waterfall, it's reassuring to know it's that way because of a topography system, not because it was the most effective methodology. And because it came a government standard, that's what everybody started using. So even the originators of waterfall did not conceive of this as the methodology. This is a bastardization of the original sort of methodology. The other thing that's important to keep in mind, this being the first process, its origins was around ballistic calculations, taking missile and firearm trajectory in the military, taking all the physics around that and codifying it in software to create ballistics algorithms. The angle and declination to fire things so that they would hit the right target. Known physics, known problem, closed system as far as the math goes. So this methodology is great when things aren't changing, when it's a closed system, when you have a mathematical way to prove that you've got the right answer. Spiral was then the next increment of this. So this is getting closer to the original thought of waterfall, the original intent, which is you go through the waterfall, but you do it in mini spirals. So you kind of go round and round the merry-go-round until you finally have the full system built. Here, each cycle, still waterfall, smaller cycle, but then in between, instead of the documentation being the artifact of collaboration, it's actually software. This is where we start to get a methodology that breaks these down. Then we have RUP, Rational Unified Process. It's a registered trademark. This is not just a methodology, it's a registered product from Rational. So it's a process, it's a product, it's UML modeling. Anybody done, do you still have to do UML here? Yep, okay. So this comes from Rational. I got to meet some of the people that were behind this, all well-intentioned people, but their success almost got in their way. The interesting irony here is one of the creators of the Rational Unified Process is the son of the guy who created Waterfall. So it's sort of all in the family. The idea here is that you do work across phases, and it's not sort of this hard, fast line that you do this work, that work, and this work, like Waterfall, sort of blended together. But if you notice there, it still kind of flows from the business modeling to the final shipping. The reality of installing this is that in America, we're so infatuated with individual productivity that the way to keep everybody busy when they're all sort of have these different phases that they're working through is you put 8 or 10 different projects on somebody's plate. And so they're time sliced across 8 or 10 different projects, which if you understand queuing math, which we'll get to here in a little bit, you understand why that breaks down. So back a while ago, Agile was then recommended as another process to get around this. We think of this as a fairly modern process, but the reality is it dates back to the early 90s. Is when the first example, specifically in Scrum. The fundamental realization of Agile is that the founding principles of Waterfall are optimizing the wrong thing. So if we think about this kind of triangle of constraints, in Waterfall, what we say is we fix the requirements, we design the full thing in its completeness, and we let, both in estimation and in actuality, we flex the resources. So again, language for Waterfall, which is you're not people, you're resources on a spreadsheet. So Waterfall says those resources can come and go. We can put 20, 30, 40, 100 more people onto it. And the time duration to shipping can flex. Agile flipped that around and says, nope, fixed resources and fixed time. You have these people, they will ship something on this date, and what flexes is the features. So this puts a lot of pressure on that in that you have to make sure you're getting the right features done first. So iterative feedback here is that you go through these collaborative sprints. It's a little bit like spiral development, but the time frames are super short. And you bake in feedback based on working software at the end of each cycle. So the first process, I think of Agile kind of as an umbrella with different, or you can think of it like a belief system with different instantiated religions underneath it. So one of those instantiated religions is Scrum. Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, that was the first one. It was documented on copier development back in the early 90s. So a team developed a copier, both the hardware, firmware, and software on top of it. They did a radically different approach to how they developed that, and that became the basis for Scrum. Probably if you want to read the best book out there on it, there's a couple new ones that have come out, but this was the sort of original one that documented it. So Scrum's based on some principles. I won't go through that, you've probably all done it. What's interesting is Scrum talks about 3 roles, 3 frameworks, 3 ceremonies. 3 roles, 3 ceremonies, 3 artifacts. So we've got roles, product owner, Scrum Master, and the team. That language did not exist before Scrum. We have ceremonies, which is the sprint planning, the sprint review, and the daily kind of syncing meeting. And then the artifacts are the backlog, the product, the sprint backlog, and then your burn down chart. So those are the fundamental 9 ingredients to make Scrum work. I think it's why I was so successful and why I got adopted. It's pretty simple. It's really easy to get started. So to me, it's a little bit like skiing. It's easy to start, but it's super hard to get world class at it. This is a schematic of the Scrum model where you've got some kind of backlog. You've got this daily and weekly cycle. It burns that backlog down, and then you poop out working software. Working meaning a customer could actually interact with it. Burn down is really a critical way to understand where the team is at. So this is based on your story points. And then Scrum also talks about sort of the social element. Scrum was one of the first methodologies that acknowledged that as human beings, we have a social layer that we interact on, and how do we manage that social layer. So it talked about sort of the development team, who's kind of sponsoring it, or who are the stakeholders around it, and then all the kind of executives that can make problems go away. Extreme programming, that was created by Kent Beck. This happens to be my personal favorite methodology. The startup that we did, we were one of the first extreme programming shops in all of Denver. Pretty cool. I've been able to have, you have these times where you look up to people. Like Kent Beck was is one of my sort of intellectual heroes, because his book really changed my whole course with the startup, my whole course, kind of a big chunk of my career. And then I had the chance to meet him, and you always had this thing where you're like, let's put these people up on pedestals, and you're like, this is going to be a super cool human being. He is. He's a super cool human being, super nice guy. His wife is amazing. The two of them are just like a hoot. He's a goat farmer. He lives on a farm in Oregon, like about the last person you can imagine. And he's now a super huge mover and shaker inside of Facebook. So Facebook's move from their initial architecture to the architecture they really scaled with, Kent Beck was a huge driving force behind that. So Extreme Programming Explained is the book that captures this. If you can find the first edition, they totally ruined the second edition in my opinion, but if you read the first edition, it's one of the best process books you can read. They talk about values. So you've got communication as a value, feedback, simplicity, and courage. So it's the first methodology that first stated, here are our core beliefs before getting into the process side of it. Then it talked about principles. How do we enable those core beliefs to come to life? They talked about thinking about the humanity of the people building the system, the economics, the benefits. He also talked a lot about how architecture blends in with product development. So you can read all the other ones there. And then there's a ton of practices. The problem with XP is it's really freaking hard to be good at XP. It requires a lot of engineering discipline, it requires a lot of human awareness, it requires a lot of skill in the craft, and it's got a ton of practices. Like you look at that and you're like, holy crap, can I actually pull all that off? When you do, it's pretty magical, but it's a pretty big hurdle. And you have to be, in my opinion, pretty much anybody can do Scrum. You have to be pretty technically sound as a team to do XP well. Then there was Crystal, Alistair Coburn. He has a PhD in software methodology. I didn't even know you could get one of those. Pretty interesting dude. He created this methodology called Crystal. It was like the Rubik's Cube of software process. Nobody adopted it because it was just really hard to figure out what to adopt. He kind of gave you a bag of Legos and said, hey, assemble it however you want. But there was some interesting mindset here. works. I think the biggest takeaway from this methodology is software development is a finite goal-seeking cooperative game of invention and communication. So really what he talked about is, I think that's actually a typo. He describes it as an infinite game, meaning that the game never ends. It's a collaborative game. There's no winner, there's no loser. The fun is in continuing the game on and on. So we had 7 properties of Crystal, and you could vary these depending on the scale of your organization. Like, it was super weird and complicated. It's a family of methodologies. You could pick whatever box you wanted to live in, which again, I think is why it didn't really get adopted. Then another methodology that came out was the lean software development methodology. This was Mary Poppendick and Tom Poppendick were the creators of this. They were on Rally's advisory board, so literally at day 3 of me working at Rally a long, long time ago, I was in a meeting with these two talking about software process, which is pretty nutty. They've done 3 books now. These are the first 2 on software development. But the lens that they looked at it through was the lens of lean. And so when you think about lean, the kind of fundamental mindsets around that was eliminate waste, amplify learning, and decide as late as possible. These are the same tenets that also created the lean startup movement from Eric Ries. This was the engineering side of it, where they talked about seeing the waste, value stream mapping, working on feedback synchronization, and then delaying to the last responsible moment when you're making decisions. That then enables delivering as fast as possible, and to do all of that, you have to empower the team. So again, 16 tools. If you notice, methodology people get infatuated with systems that have like 30 ways of doing something and 30 ways to think about it. They have 16, but still 16 really hard to keep in mind. Oh, sorry. Not 16, 22. Integrity and signal. So a lot to this. When you get really good at this, super powerful. And then one of the things that I sort of taught the class early on was Kanban. David Anderson, really brilliant guy. He's got some significant user interface issues, but he's a super smart guy. 2 of his books, the one on the right there, Kanban, if you want to learn about Kanban, is still the best book out there on how to do it. This is an adaptation of what the Poppendieck's did around lean. The whole idea here is there's a Kanban board, a signal board that allows you to coordinate your work. No different than this. I believe this is if I remember right, this is the Kanban board of process for any engine manufacturing at, I want to say it's Yamaha or Honda. This is how they manage physically with cars the process of building engines. The idea here is that you've got some flow that the work goes along. You really focus on the flow of that work. Easy to stripe just with boards. I teach this to almost all the Techstars companies now, how to do these very simple boards. The interesting thing is that Scrum is probably the best process. You know, now with about 20 years of history on this, Scrum has emerged to be probably one of the best easy processes for engineering teams to pick up and use. Kanban has emerged as the best process for whole businesses or departments outside of engineering to use. It's very effective no matter what kind of work you're doing. The idea here is that if we limit the amount of work that's going through the system, we will maximize the quality and the throughput of the system. This also takes concepts from the goal. Goldrad's work. Anybody here, have you read the goal in business class? It's kind of cheesy, but it's the basis of all American manufacturing now. It was the adaptation of lean manufacturing more into the American mindset. So this is all about discovering bottlenecks. All right. So that's sort of an overview of the practices. The art and the craft is up to you. What I want to do now is make this come alive. So I just bored you with like a run through of like 30 years of software, 40 years of software process. Before I switch to the activity, what questions do you have based on the Blitzkrieg overview I just gave you on software process?
What are the ideal team sizes in stream programming?
Yeah, sort of the rule of thought is 7 plus or minus 2, somewhere between 5 and 9. The reality is the more senior a team is, the bigger it can be. The more junior a team, the more I highly recommend keep a smaller team size. What other questions? I can geek out with this stuff for hours, and I spent 15 years of my career in this world. So, Okay, you want to have some fun? Do a little fun hands-on activity? Cool. So we're going to go into kind of an embodied experience of what I just described. And we're going to do it with poker chips. Feel like I'm fun with poker chips? So what I need is we're going to have to take over one of the tables here. So if trying to look at just table density. Needs to be 2 tables. So I'm going to have to pick on either that side or this side. So if I could get, I just need to clear like one side of either part of this table or part of that table off. I'm almost thinking maybe this side. Do you mind if we clear? You're okay on that side. We just need to clear this side off. Now we're closer to the camera. Okay. Now I need some volunteers, and if we could get 4 or 5 chairs pulled up here. And if you could videotape, you'll probably want to stand back there a little bit. I'd love to actually have a video. 3 volunteers. The 3 volunteers now are volunteering to be workers. Who would like to volunteer to be a worker? All right, I need 2 more workers. One more worker who feels like working.
Are there any other jobs?
Yeah, there's other jobs. But we need 4 workers first. Awesome. Okay. Who would like to be the customer? All right, come on over. All right, now we need 4 managers. Who feels like being a manager? All right, stand behind the worker and breathe on them a little bit. Come on over and stand behind a worker.
Don't look at me.
I'll explain your roles here in a second. We need maybe 1 more manager, it looks like. All right, now I need 2 executives. Who would like to be an executive?
Don't worry, boss.
1 more executive. All right, executive. So now the managers and executives, I need you to have some way to tell to do timings. So I need to have a stopwatch, which fortunately now all phones and most watches are pretty good at stopwatches. So managers, are you equipped to do your job? Do you have a stopwatch?
Yes.
Executives, are you equipped to do your job? Okay. All right. So the goal of this is we've got 20 poker chips. Kind of stand over here and explain this so the customers who, or the workers who are going to do the work here can understand this. So we've got 20 poker chips. The idea is to get these 20 poker chips to the customer as fast as possible. The way we're going to work on these chips is, got the stack of 20, you have to flip the chip. That's the work that you're doing. So you have to flip all 20 chips. Try to flip them as fast as possible. And during this time, the customer's going to be screaming, hey, where's my chips? You can be sort of passive-aggressive, a little abusive if you like. And you're going to flip those 20 chips. Once you have them all flipped, you're going to hand the chips to the next worker.
Yeah,
so we'll start over.
Individually.
Flip them individually. And you'll flip them first. Flip all 20, hand the batch of 20. You'll flip them, hand the batch of 20. You'll flip them, batch of 20. Ultimately, when you're done flipping them, to the customer, finished value. The role of the managers are to time this. So as soon as your worker touches the first chip, start your stopwatch. As soon as your worker flips the last chip and hands them out, stop your stopwatch. Okay? The executives, you're paying attention to the whole system. So the first chip that's flipped, start your timer. And if you're one of the executives, right? Yeah. So when the first chip hits the customer, stop your stopwatch. When the last chip hits the customer, stop your stopwatch. Now, in the first time we're playing this, pretty obvious, those will be hopefully the same number. This is why you have multiple executives, so that they can check in on each other and make sure they're both accurate. So you can kind of keep an eye on each other, because executives are not just keeping an eye on the system, they're keeping an eye on each other. All right, what questions do you have about this goofy game that we're about to play?
So we're getting paid?
Do you get paid? So you'll start. So,